Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du, fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qala Allah ta'ala fil Quranil Hakim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal mau'izatil hasanati wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Inna rabbaka huwa alamu biman zalla an sabilihi wa huwa alamu bil muhtadin. Wa in aqabtum fa'aqibu bimisli ma uqibtum bihi wa la in sabartum lahuwa khairun lis-sabirin. Sadaqallahul azim. The verses which I have recited there, the two verses, they translate as follows. Call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and goodly exhortation, and argue with them, that is to say with people, argue with them in the best manner. Surely your Lord knows best he who strays from his path, and he knows best those who go on the right path. And if you take your turn, then retaliate with the like of what you are afflicted with. But if you show patience, it is certainly best for the patient, the sabirin. This is chapter 16, An-Naḥl, verses 125 and 126. At the end of the last khutbah, I referred briefly to some verses of the Holy Quran in connection with what Islam teaches about acting in retaliation when you have been attacked. These teachings are not only for Muslims, but any civilized nation can benefit from them as well. In the two verses I have just recited, the second verse deals with retaliation, while the first verse guides Muslims on how to preach and spread the message of Islam. That preaching is to be done in a manner that minimizes a reaction of hostility from the other side. This means that in case you are persecuted and attacked because of preaching that message, the fault does not lie with you. Calling to the way of your Lord, as stated at the beginning of the first verse which I read, this is what you are supposed to be doing. This is what we are supposed to be doing, and not calling to my way or to my religion. We must therefore be conscious and careful to ensure that what we are calling people to, what we are teaching them, what we are telling them, is in accordance with the message that has come from our Lord. And we must therefore examine our own beliefs and behavior, and if necessary, correct them to bring them in line with the teachings of the Holy Quran and the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A Muslim must not behave as if he is high and mighty and possesses and owns the truth which he is preaching from a high pulpit down to misguided people who are inferior to him. That is not the approach that a Muslim should have. The next point taught in the verses which are recited is that the message must be preached using wisdom. Through wisdom, we must discover the way which is most effective and this depends on the circumstances, and that way is certainly not always the same. Different kinds of people need to be approached in different ways. Wisdom also means that we present the message being supported by reason, evidence, and knowledge. We should not be trying to attract people to our message by exploiting their existing prejudices or ignorance and encouraging them to remain bound to them, and by appealing to people's lower instincts. This, unfortunately, is what religious clerics do, including those among Muslims, in their preachings. Their aim is not people's welfare or to increase people's knowledge, but their aim is just to attract more and more people to become their followers. Now the verse says, with wisdom and goodly exhortation, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and goodly exhortation. Goodly exhortation is to give people good advice on what to do and what not to do, how to behave and how not to behave for their own benefit in their lives. According to Islam, religion is not just about believing in some doctrines and carrying out some rituals. Religion should also give advice on leading our lives in other matters. That advice can benefit anyone, whether they agree with our religion or not. A Muslim should want others, whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims, to benefit from the guidance given by Islam. Here is just one example among many examples that I could think of. The Holy Quran says that a previous prophet, giving histories of prophets before the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that a previous prophet said to his people, and do not give short measure and weight, and my people give full measure and weight justly. Give full measure and weight justly, and do not defraud people of their things, and do not act corruptly in the land, making mischief. Chapter 11 verses 84 and 85. Now this good advice will benefit any human being. And in countries where this advice, not to give short measure and weight and give full measure and weight justly, where this advice is taken very seriously by people and by their governments, in those countries there is greater prosperity, economic security and justice than in countries where this advice is ignored, regardless of whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims. Next, this verse says, argue with them in the best manner. Now, when you call people to follow a path, and in this case we are talking about the way of your Lord, you naturally become involved in arguments and debates with those who disagree with you. And this arguing in the best manner, as the Holy Quran calls it, is to do both things. Present the best arguments and evidences, and to do that in the best behaved and most polite manner, showing consideration for the feelings of others. Unfortunately, in arguments and debates, we usually see the opposite of this. The purpose of arguments and debates becomes to score a personal victory over the other side and not to establish the truth. All kinds of foul and unfair tactics are used to try winning debates. A common tactic is that if your opponent presents a truth, but your opponent can't prove it, then you in reply just don't accept that fact, even if you know that it is true, because your opponent couldn't prove it. And another tactic is that you present some made up facts, some false things to support your case, and you hope that your opponent doesn't realize that they are not true and he doesn't question them. You do that having that hope. So these are these foul and unfair tactics just to win a debate. And on a personal note, in my youth, I once had an argument with a renowned Pakistani Maulvi here in the UK. He made some accusation against the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And I answered the accusation by quoting a verse of the Holy Quran, or giving him its meaning. I didn't quote it in Arabic word for word. I gave him its sense and meaning. He handed me a copy of the Quran and asked me to find the verse and show it to him. I couldn't find it. Of course, he knew it was in the Quran, but he said to me, if you can't show it to me, then I don't need to answer your argument. So these are the kind of tactics that are employed just to score a point in a debate and to win it. In India, before partition, before the creation of Pakistan, Maulana Abdul Haq Vidyarthi, the famous scholar of the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement, used to take part in public debates on behalf of Muslims, against a virulently anti-Islamic Hindu sect known as the Arya Samaj. One of the last such debates before partition was in Delhi in February 1944. The Arya Samaj had challenged other religions to debate with them at their annual conference being held in Delhi. And our Jamaat in Delhi, the Anjuman Islam of Delhi, accepted the challenge on behalf of Muslims. The topic of the debate was the truth of the Holy Prophet Muhammad is established from prophecies contained in the Vedas. The Vedas are the Hindu scriptures. And at the debate, Maulana Abdul Haq Vidyarthi answered all the objections of the Arya Samaj scholars, their objections about the existence of this prophecy, if it is there at all in the Vedas, the meaning of this prophecy. He answered all their objections and he rendered them speechless. They couldn't say anything in reply. Muslims in the audience were overjoyed and they were reciting the Durood, sending blessings on the Holy Prophet when they saw this happening. At the end of the debate, just before the audience of Hindus and Muslims dispersed, the co-chairman of the proceedings of the debate, there was a co-chairman from the side of our Jamaat, the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat. His name was Maulana Sayyid Akhtar Hussain Gilani. He made a strong appeal to the Muslims. He urged them to refrain from raising any slogans declaring their happiness at this victory, because he said this would hurt the feelings of our Hindu brethren. He asked Muslims, his fellow Muslims, to leave the hall in a calm and orderly manner. It is also stated in a newspaper report about this debate, and I'll just translate that. It says, Maulana Abdul Haq Vidyarthi's rational style of argumentation, his virtuous behavior, his courtesy and his polite manners, and the friendly attitude of the Ahmadiyya organizers of the debate made a deep impression on the Hindus, while the hearts of the Muslims were filled with faith and knowledge. And what this newspaper report tells us exactly conforms to the command of the Holy Quran to argue in the best manner. And Maulana Abdullah Vidyarthi used to tell us that his way of giving his answer in replying to vile accusations against Islam, his way was that it should fully answer the accusation, but without hurting the feelings of the opponent. And similarly, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, writes in his booklet, which is called Al-Wasiyat, or his will, in which he gives parting instructions to his followers. He has this brief sentence, which in English is this: that defeat which earns the pleasure of God is better than the victory which brings his displeasure. So what he means is that it's no good winning a debate and scoring points over your opponents, even if your cause is right. It's no good winning a debate if you achieved it by behaving in a way which displeases Allah. The second verse in the passage which I recited at the beginning, its translation is, and I repeat it now, and if you take your turn, then retaliate with the like of what you are afflicted with. But if you show patience, it is certainly best for the patient, the sabirin. What this is talking about is Muslims being persecuted in Makkah for calling people to the way of the Lord, for preaching the message of Islam. And of course they were doing it using wisdom, goodly exhortation, and arguing in the best manner, but they were still being persecuted. And these verses were revealed before they migrated to Medina. They were under persecution by the unbelievers of the Quraysh for propagating the message of Islam. At that time, it was unknown, and no one could foresee that a time would come when Muslims would get their turn against their persecutors. As this verse says, and if you take your turn. The persecution continued at Makkah, and after the Muslims emigrated to Medina, that persecution took the form of war against Muslims by the residents of Makkah. In the end, Muslims did get their turn over their persecutors to hold them to account, and they did not retaliate with the like of what they were afflicted with, but showed patience. Now here the Holy Quran tells Muslims that the maximum they are allowed to do against their defeated enemy is to punish the enemy to the same scale and magnitude that their enemies had employed against them. But this is the maximum Muslims are allowed to do. And what is recommended by the Holy Quran is that they show patience, Muslims show patience and restrain themselves. Patience is at its best when someone who has the choice whether to be patient or to retaliate, he has the choice, he can do either. But he chooses the path of patience. That's when patience is at its best, when you choose to do it. So, speaking generally, if you are in a position as an individual or as a group or as a country to strike back at your enemy, then it is up to you to decide whether to react by retaliation to an equal extent, or take the higher path recommended by the Holy Quran and restrain yourself. The same guidance is given in another place in the Holy Quran, and I'll just read those verses in translation. It says, "And who is better in speech than the person who calls people to Allah and does good? And he says to people, I am one of those who submit to Allah." And not alike are the good and the evil. Repel evil with what is best. When you will find that the person between whom and you is enmity would be as if he were a warm friend, and none is granted it. In other words, none is granted to behave like this, but those who are patient, and none is granted it but the owner of a mighty good fortune. Chapter 41, whose name is Hamim, verses 33 to 35. So when this says here, and good and evil are not alike, they are not alike and equal. What that means is, you are on the path of good. So do not let the evil done to you by others drag you down to become like them. Because good and evil are not alike, they are not equal. You are not on the same plane. So don't let yourself be dragged down to their level. Now, if people, talking about retaliation, if people insist on repelling the evil of their enemies with evil, in other words, by harming the enemy, even if it's by the same amount, let alone it being excessive, even if it's by the same amount as what the enemy did, the enemy may respond similarly later on, or even worse, or even in a greater measure. And then the cycle of retaliation will go on and on. One side doing it, then the other saying the first side did it, then the first side does it saying the second side did it, and so on. To break this cycle, one side or the other has to respond with patience. And then, only then, the two sides will have the chance to become, as the Holy Quran says, warm friends. He between whom and you is enmity, as we say in Urdu, dushmani. He will be a close and warm friend, not just a friend, a warm friend. And as those verses go on to say, which I just read, those who respond with patience, only they can do it, who are the owners of a mighty good fortune. So in the end we pray that may Allah, in the Middle East and elsewhere, may Allah grant to one party or to the other, or even to both parties, that mighty good fortune that the Holy Quran is talking about here. That is the only way in which they will have a mighty good fortune. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun balikun barurufur rahim.